Welcome to Psychologist Talks. On today's episode, we're going to talk about quote-unquote toxic empathy, as a topic alerted to me by both my wife and an esteemed colleague. Here it's been going around. I've personally not seen it up until this point, and it's kind of curious. And so I'll go into a couple things today. One, just a quick commentary on the word toxic, because I think that's an important foundation upon which the rest of the conversation has to exist. Number two, I will give what I spontaneously hoped it might mean. So before I went and researched it, I was like, all right, what could a plausible toxic empathy mean? Knowing my role, my profession, those sorts of things. And then I'll go into what I researched, what I found out, and some, spoiler alert, some critiques and commentary about how this term is, frankly, misguided. So first, just kind of addressing the whole toxic thing. You know, we do this as a society. I think we always have, as we create these cognitive shortcuts that I'm sure there's a fancy term for it, but they sort of encapsulate a more complex idea in a single word, right? So, or phrase, toxic fill in the blank. I think it was useful at first because for those of you who are, maybe can't appreciate or the word's already been ruined for you, my understanding of this idea of toxicity is this notion that all aspects of self in excess can become toxic. Just like if there's a dearth of something or something is not present enough, it can cause an opposite problem. I don't know what toxic would be. Starved? I don't know. It's not enough of. Whereas toxicity simply implies like, hey, if there's too much of fill in the blank, it can get to an unhealthy level. And that's useful, right? Like that, I very much believe in the dialectics in our field, and when I work with people, I'm always talking about trying to find that counterbalancing, that which could be healthy and that which could be detrimental, that all strengths have potential liabilities, that every yin has its yang, and that wisdom and flexibility in mental health comes with differentiating and finding the gray between forces as we get older and as we have more experiences. And so this whole notion of toxicity says like, hey, again, if it gets to be too much, it's a problem. Unfortunately, us human beings can't have nice things for very long before we sort of inappropriately appropriate and overgeneralize a term to where it then begins to lose meaning. That the heritage, the reason, sort of the atmosphere in which the term or the phrase was created is lost. And it becomes a caricature. It becomes just kind of a neon sign flashing in our face that just becomes more of a sort of emotionally reaction drawing sort of entity rather than something that means something, that has greater depth underneath it. And so lo and behold, I think, we are already leaning too heavily on this whole notion of toxicity, the big one being like masculinity. We began to overextend what even could mean or imply some degree of toxic masculinity as a car with a noisy spoiler drives by. If you heard that, which statistically would fall likely under a particular gender, it would not be toxic. It would not be toxic. It's funny timing there. Anyway, I mean, it could be toxic, but correlation, right? Not causation. Anyway, and so like clockwork, we've overextended. And so now we've got the, if you see it as kind of opposing factions, who typically uses the word toxic more at first? Well, it was more social justice oriented ideologies. And now we have the opposing ideology appropriating it inappropriately. Not that it wasn't already getting a little out of control, but here we go. We can't have nice things. So this whole toxic notion has kind of been soiled, right? Like we have to find a new way to define things because we've ruined it. I think we've ruined this word pretty effectively. And we can reclaim it later, right? But for now, we've kind of screwed the pooch a little bit here. What a weird term. I don't even know that he screwed the pooch. Doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound good. I gotta look that up later. All right. I'm digressing too much. So, getting to the point before I researched, I'm like, all right, what could be a feasible, reasonable explanation for what toxic empathy would be? And it's very intuitive to me. It's like, well, a lot of people who come to see me really empathize too much. I mean, it can get into a place of excess. But note, the excess is not the empathy itself. It is what someone does when they feel empathy. So the traditional sort of mode of action here is that someone is highly empathetic. These individuals, just anecdotally, they tend to have high levels of sensitivity, not in the realm of like frailty, not like emotional frailty, But we have different temperamental makeups, and there are those of us in the world that are just constantly sensing our environment, and it can be a very overwhelming experience because we can turn empathy into like mind reading and like, oh God, the world has all these needs and expectations of us, and that's where it becomes toxic because the empathy then gets to be confused with some sort of necessary action, which is not how empathy works. We can empathize with someone without feeling like we have to fix anything. And the wisdom within empathy is learning the difference between those two, that we don't necessarily have to overextend ourselves just because we feel empathy. Are there times it is absolutely necessary to both feel the empathy and be compelled towards action? 100%. But it's not a 100% thing. So, that's what I work on with people is like, know your boundaries, know your own needs, know what, even if the cause is reasonable and righteous, it does not mean you are currently in a place or you ever have to be in a place to take action. And we have to figure out the difference between those two. Now, this is where we get into what this alleged term of toxic empathy is, and you'll hear versions of that, what I just said in this, but it's a really kind of perverse version of empathy. I think there's a lot of confusion. So first, let me talk about like the birthplace of this, and it seems to be mostly popularized in a recent book, largely arguing from like a Christian religious perspective. And it's been adopted seemingly by politics because, we just weaponize everything in politics nowadays, it seems like. So the what I understand is the sort of religious notion. I won't say it's the religious notion. It's the notion allegedly tied to religion. And it's a book I care not name or plug. But I looked it up, and it's basically saying, like, well, the left, I mean, very specifically, the political left, which is just a fancy, stupid way for saying, like, people who are more socially progressive. This is the issue at hand. It's social progression and socially progressive initiatives. They are pushing an agenda on Christians that is forcing them to give up their values somehow. And it's basically a narrative of false oppression. And the reason why I think it's effective is there are I think subtle aspects of oppression, I would argue, that are going on with Christianity, but this is an overextension of it, which I will get into. And so it's saying like, look, we need to stand our ground. This like leftist agenda can't have us abandon our Christian values, blah, 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 which basically ties religion with politics, because then they start talking about like, well, then there's a policy implication, which is the second issue, because the whole notion of the creation of our country, I'll say our, but like my country, the United States, was to get away from politics dictated by religion, fairly or not. I mean, sometimes religion was the shield that was used to rationalize decisions that were merely political, but therein lies the problem. This is the whole notion of creating a new version creating democracy and creating a version of governing that is separated from church, right? Separation of church from state. So that even if this first point held any water, nobody is forcing and nobody should feel compelled to impose religious beliefs on political decisions, right? Like the essential notion here is like, well, we can't use our religion to oppress to oppress the political system, to oppress other people, right? To pressure, I should say, the political system to oppress people. And so now we are the oppressed, right? Because we are being asked to just allow socially progressive policies to unfold, which, by the way, religion has been used in the past, unfortunately, to suggest other people don't deserve rights either. And yet somehow we moved away from those. It's ridiculous. Like, you don't belong in this country, frankly, if you believe that. Like, you can have your own values. You can have your own, like, yeah, I don't believe in gay marriage. But in a democracy, it's not my place to dictate whether or not that's something that's allowable in the greater political atmosphere. So I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. That's kind of a better second point. The long and the short of it is, all right, let's go back to this whole false notion of oppression. To me, the only real kernel of truth when it comes to oppression is I think it's become a little bit of a fad and a little bit cool to shit on religion. And the reason for that usually is like, well, we look back at history, whether it's history in general or my personal experience with religion, particularly Christianity, although I've heard a lot of bad things about other religions too, and go like, well, let's throw this baby out with the bathwater because I've been hurt, because it's been used to hurt other people. Let's just abolish it, right? Like, not that people are saying to abolish it, but they in effect, like, religion is bad. Religion is bad. And, I think that's quite unfair. Is religion a frequent culprit when it comes to oppressive forces by history and even to this present day? Absolutely. But religion itself is not the problem. It's humanity. It always is humans, right? Humans mess up things. Religion should be monitored and kept an eye on, make sure that that it's not allowed to influence things unduly. Just like we can't have a society only ruled by science. We can't have a society only ruled by religion. We can't have a society only ruled by like very strict constitutional rules and laws that never evolve with the time. It's its own dilemma and debate. Like there's ways in which it behooves us to hold to the Constitution, but there are other ways in which it would have suffocated us if we were too literal with it, particularly in socially progressive ideologies, basic equity, civil rights movement, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think we need to get better about that because, it's the nature of psychology is if something you believe in is relentlessly attacked in a way that often feels unfair, people are going to get defensive. Like, not everybody is so psychologically minded and humble to be like, well, I can suss this out. I've met plenty of Christians who can, right? They can acknowledge dialectically that religion is and continues to be miswielded, but simultaneously say like, yeah, but I'm not going to abandon religion. There's still good in it. Just because people are misusing it doesn't mean there's not good in it. And go to gun rights, right? Like, should guns be monitored? Do you need an automatic weapon to be mowing down people in, Kentucky somewhere? No, you probably don't. But we don't throw the baby out with that bathwater. You don't like destroy all guns and assume the world will be a safer place simply because the guns aren't there, right? Like, so it's all about this sort of balancing. And religion's gotten a little bit of an unfair rap, a little bit, as it continues to be miswielded in the present day. But that's the only notion of oppression I'm willing to entertain when it comes to, religion and specifically Christianity. This notion, though, that socially progressive policies are being used to squelch and suppress and oppress religious beliefs is a false notion. Anybody who has tried to say that is, one, in the minority of people, and two, shouldn't be listened to. Most people, I think, are reasonable, and they're leading to point number two is like separation of church and state. Like, you don't get to do that, right? Just because you have a particular belief system doesn't mean you get to govern all people through that belief system. Once again, to point number two, we're a damn democracy, and we were formed specifically, very specifically, based on this notion. And if we're going to hold to that, we probably need to hold to it. All this to say that underneath it all is a very perverse understanding of empathy. It goes back to what I was saying about my work with clients. Like, my job is not to say, like, you need to choose when you empathize or not. It is about how you wield the empathy. And so, you can't force empathy on people, right? And even Christianity speaks to the power of empathy, independent of whether or not it aligns with one's belief system. I mean, if you want to believe in like the more fire and brimstone version of Christianity, good on you. I don't think it's going to be a very fun life for you if you believe that. But anywhere in the vicinity of a more loving and compassionate God is in the realm of like you empathize first, right? Like you treat people with respect, even if they don't believe the same thing that you believe. And I was refreshed to see when I'm reading the reviews on this book, some people like, high-five in the book, but then other people very clearly quoting and talking about their own experiences with Christianity going, this is the most anti-Christian thing I've heard. And so it's just really messed up. It doesn't make any sense to me. I've worked in the Catholic Church, particularly with Franciscans, and even the Catholic Church, which is often, I think, the stereotype of them, and those are extremely black and white. Franciscans are a model of this, deeply sympathetic and empathetic people who, can look you in the face, and they'll treat you with love and respect even if they don't agree with the life decision that you're going through, because it doesn't matter, right? Like, it doesn't matter. It's not for them to wield. That's not the point. That is not the power of humanity. That is beyond their power in that religion. And so, again, it's this, like, I can't oppress people with my beliefs, so I must be oppressed if I'm confronted. If society begins to do anything in the disservice of my belief system. It is, and then using empathy as a weapon and saying, like, how dare you force me to empathize, and thereby force me to act on that empathy. You can't force somebody to empathize, and nobody's forcing you to take action, even if you're willing to empathize. It's a convenient way to scapegoat. It's a convenient way to basically say, I get to choose whether or not I care for my fellow human being. And it's just, I think it's the nature of the world right now is like this, rather than having to grapple with this gray zone, it's just easier to throw the baby out with the bathwater and be like, we're just, this is all just being forced upon us. So I have the right to throw up my middle finger and be like, screw all of y'all. It's just gross. And it is a dangerous precedent to even remotely entertain as a society. You want to know how, like, wars and stuff started in the past. It's like, well, they're bad, right? They're oppressing us. They're unjust. They're unrighteous. Well, that means I've got to control them. We specifically moved away from this for a reason. So it's perverse from my professional lens. It is perverse from a historical lens, and it is even perverse from a religious lens. So it's one of those terms just meant to stoke emotions and has little to no utility, because the only utility it has requires a greater depth of understanding of what it even means. And as far as I can tell, it's not being leveraged that way. If we had a conversation of like, hey, what's the difference between our empathy, like having empathy for people and our values? Oh, I'll have that substantive conversation. That's a great conversation to have. That is a critical thought exercise. This moves, those sorts of exercises move societies forward, and they make sure that people are brought along, because it's not so black and white. It's conversation. It's meant to be a dialogue. But instead, let's just create a bomb of a term that meanwhile collaterally damages a fundamental human experience, and the human experience essential to the fabric of society. Let's do that. So anyway, hopefully this made sense. I felt a little bit more rambly on the second half, but as always, I appreciate everybody listening and watching, and as always, and especially when it comes to empathy, stay curious.